Good morning, everyone. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. And as usual, we do begin with the prayer. I've asked Ms. Heather Bodden to lead the committee in that prayer at this time.
Thank you, sir. Our kind Heavenly Father, we humbly bow our heads in reverence. We come before you with grateful hearts. Lord, today, we thank you for your mercies. We thank you for all you've done for us these past few months. We ask for your continued blessings. Grant us peace, unity, and serenity in your presence and purpose in doing what we've called upon to do. Give us a good day. May we undertake all that we do seriously as before us today. Guide our thoughts, words, and actions. And all this I pray in your holy name's sake. Amen.
Thank you, Ms. Heather. Good morning again to everyone. It is good to see you here. They say third time's a charm. It's our third effort now to achieve a quorum and get this inquiry and examination of this report from the Auditor General completed. We are here this morning to examine a report entitled Financial Reporting of the Cayman Islands Government that was issued by the Auditor General's Office in October 2023. We have had apologies from two members, Mr. Bernie Bush, who was recently appointed to the committee, and the Honourable McKeeva Bush. Now, notwithstanding these two apologies, we do remain quorate this morning, and so the committee can proceed with the hearing. I want to say a special welcome to the Auditor General's office, and particularly Ms. Sue Winspear, the Auditor General. She has with her the Deputy Auditor General for Financial Audit, Mr. Winston Sobers, Mr. Gabriel Nube, an Audit Manager from the office, and Mr. Desmond Mutava, Audit Project Leader. Gentlemen, welcome as well to the committee. I also recognize that we have the Financial Secretary, Mr. Kenneth Jefferson, as well as Mr. Matthew Tibbetts, the Accountant General, who is sitting in as is customary. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to the Auditor General and ask her now if she would introduce the report that we are here to examine this morning. Auditor General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. Good morning to members of the committee, DG, officials from the Ministry of Finance, and those listening in. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make some opening remarks. And as you say, we're considering our general report on the entity audits for 2022. And indeed, at the moment, we're hot in completing the entity audits for 2023. This report gives the results of all the 2022 audits conducted and concluded by the 30th of September and draws out the thematic significant audit matters. By September last year, 40 out of 46 entity audits had been concluded, and all audits had received a clean or unqualified, unmodified audit opinion. And this continues the impressive run of reporting at an entity level in Cayman. Subsequent to the report, we've concluded 2 more audits, and both of those have also had a clean opinion. As I say, the state of financial reporting at entity level in Cayman is strong. But it's worth noting that the consolidated entire public sector account still has its 2021 and 2022 audits outstanding. And the 2020 audit was concluded in December last year, just before Christmas, and it saw the continuation of an adverse audit opinion. And this is of concern. It's important that colleagues in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development continue to implement the corrective action plan they have developed to move this account from an adverse opinion to firstly a qualified opinion and then an unqualified one over time. I will now briefly highlight the main areas of concern that we found through undertaking the 2022 entity audits. Our first concern regards the quality of some of the entities' financial reporting. For the 40 audits we reported on in the report, based in September, over 280 audit adjustments valued at over 115 million were made. Our second area of concern seems to be a reluctance to disclose sufficient detail in the financial statements about severance payments, commitments, subsequent events, and inadequate explanations are often given for budget variances. These are all things required by accounting standards and all things that the public are interested in. We found a concerning number of instances where entities did not comply with the Procurement Act, including examples of direct awards without approval through a business case and lack of public procurement committee approval for contracts over 250,000. This raises concerns about the value for money the country is getting through procurement. Funding implementation of Section 47 of the Public Authorities Act remains a concern, and I have again raised concerns about the costs of implementation and budgeting for these. With regard to that Act, a small number of statutory authorities and government companies have still not implemented the revised pay scales that will align their employees' pay with that of the civil service, despite the exercise having been completed. I've made 5 recommendations in the report, which I hope the PAC will endorse and probe through this hearing. Finally, before concluding, I would like just to make one small correction to our report. On page 11, paragraph 28 of the report, we detail examples where the Procurement Act and regulation weren't followed. In the, which bullet point is it? In the final bullet point, I would like to remove the communication tower example of 930,000 from the list, because whilst that ministry could not produce evidence that it had been before the Public Procurement Committee, the Corporate Procurement Office did find evidence for us, so that one was in compliance, and I apologise that we have to make that correction, but obviously it reduces the number of non-compliant instances. Thank you for introducing my team. Winston obviously leaves the financial audit practice, and Gabriel and Desmond have done the most work in producing the report. We'll be happy to assist you through the hearing, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor General. Now, members, the Auditor General's report summarises the financial results and the audit opinions that were given to public bodies for 2022. And the report itself provides a host of information about the financial health of public bodies. The report draws attention to several key audit matters. The report makes 5 recommendations to bring about improvement, and while some are new, some are repeat recommendations made in other reports issued by the Auditor General in the past. We are going to be hearing later this morning from the Financial Secretary, the Accountant General, and Deputy Director from the Central Procurement Office about the role of the Ministry of Finance. So we thank and appreciate you all being here today, and knowing how busy you must be, we're going to endeavour to limit our questions to those we feel are most important. Similarly, we'll also be grateful if you would keep your responses brief so that we can cover the range of areas that we have in the available time before us, but I don't want in any way to limit your responses. And with that introductory from me, I would invite the Honourable Deputy Governor, if he would take his place in the committee. Good morning, Deputy Governor. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the Public Accounts Committee.
Yes, sir. Deputy Governor, the Auditor General has made 2 recommendations in the 2022 General Report relating to Section 47 of the Public Authorities Act. I want to begin this hearing with discussion of each of these in turn. First off, the Auditor General reports that the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority and the Civil Aviation Authority should urgently, or she recommends that these 2 entities should urgently complete the implementation of the Public Authorities Act to ensure they are fully compliant with the Act. We understand that the Port Authority recently complied by implementing the government pay scale. Secondly, the government needs to consider the financial implications before further implementing the Public Authorities Act, Section 47. This is a repeat recommendation first made in the Performance Audit Reporting, Improving Financial Accountability and Transparency, Financial Management and Transparency in May 2021, and again in the 2021 General Report. In its management response, government agreed and accepted that recommendation. However, it appears that the government's response may only be in relation to Section 47(1) of the Public Authorities Act on salary scales and not Section 47(3) on pension and health care benefits. However, no action has taken place today. The Auditor General noted some inconsistencies in applying the PAA Section 47 by several SAGCs. Some SAGCs applied the salary adjustments from the effective date of the PAA of Public Authorities Act Section 47, that is from the 1st of June 2019, whilst others applied the salary adjustments from when the job evaluation exercise was completed. The inconsistencies in applying this section of the Act can mainly be attributed to the guidance provided. This has resulted in some public servants being treated unequally. Deputy Governor, I wish to ask you first, what is the role of the Deputy Governor's Office in providing guidance and ongoing support to public bodies with regard to the implementation of Public Authorities Act Section 47?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. So, as head of the civil service, the operative board of civil service, I have I have no authority over the public authorities. That is, they are operated by a board, and they report up in the ministries from the chief officer up to the minister. But obviously, we have a good working relationship with the public authorities. And the portfolio of the civil service, which is the portfolio that I'm directly responsible for, was responsible for evaluating all of the job descriptions for the SAGCs, and then doing that in line with civil service jobs using the same methodology, and then reporting that back into the SAGCs in terms of where certain jobs fitted on the civil service salary scale. So that job has been completed. There's been large compliance with the public authorities law. I think we are now down to two SAGCs that have not implemented the salary scale. I can't tell them to do it. That's not my role. I don't have any authority over it. I think they should be asked why they haven't. Again, that's not my role. That my role is to have ensured that all of the job descriptions were evaluated and given to them, and then it was for their board and their CEO to get it implemented.
I understand you say you can't direct them to.
Right.
And I accept what you say,
yes.
But it's not possible for you to use your influence or urging or
Yes.
in order to help drive the compliance.
Well, Mr. Chairman, certainly. I mean, you know, with the blessing of this committee, when I go back to my office, I can send them a nudge to say you need to do this. I'm quite happy to do it. I'm just saying, you know, I'm responsible for a lot of things, but this one I am not directly responsible for. I'm not head of the public service. I'm head of the civil service. So my job is to make sure that the civil service, the ministries and portfolios perform. But again, I'm not here to make excuses. Certainly, I'm happy to give those entities a nudge and say that they should comply. I mean, we have had dialogue from time to time. And I'm aware that those two particular agencies have said that implementing the salary scale will impact their ability to hire best talent. My response to that is that we have a market factor provision in the Public Authorities Law, whereas if you continue to recruit and unable to attract best talent, then you can apply a market factor consideration so that you do get the best talent. The two agencies that we're talking about are highly specialized SAGCs, and they are, I think, concerned around their ability to attract talent. But again, I think it's something that can be worked out. But I will send a note, sir, and pass it to you as well.
I think that the Public Accounts Committee would welcome that, sir, and with regard to it. But I note too that, you know, most of the effort with compliance has taken around the issue of standardizing the salary scales.
That's correct.
But it seems like the other, as I said in my preamble, that Section 47.3 regarding pensions and health care remains largely unaddressed.
That's correct.
I know that I think POX had probably been involved in a very big way with trying to help them with these issues.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, again, thank you. The Auditor General raises an excellent point. This is something that needs to be addressed. It needs to be costed. You know, what is this going to cost us? So it is a policy decision that our policymakers have to make. It's again, now that we're here today, I think what I will do as an action is to, you know, take it back to the elected government and look to see what policies we need to do to address this issue. Make them aware of the report, make them aware of the concerns, and then come up with a solution so that this matter doesn't come up again when the entities are audited again. So my undertaking, Mr. Chairman, is to have a policy decision made over the next couple of months in relation to this issue, because it has dragged on for a bit too long.
Yes, sir. And if I remember correctly, there, you know, diversity of ways in which you know, the SAGCs you know, have provided healthcare coverage, for example. Right. Some are using a private, as well as some are using, you know, the government health scheme.
That's correct.
And yeah, so I think in my mind, it seems to be needs to be a real push again to try and standardize it, because I know that it's creating issues, particularly with people once they retire from the SAGC, and they often find that they're without healthcare coverage.
That's correct. And of course, Mr. Chairman, as the Auditor General has pointed out, that's a very costly exercise. Providing post-retirement health care is very costly. And if that is something that is going to happen in every single government entity, then we would need to look at that very carefully and look at the costing.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Financial Secretary.
I just wanted, sorry, yes, sir. Good morning. I just wanted to add some information to what is being said, and I'm mindful of the need to be brief. What I would say is that in connection with trying to get a grip on the cost of the implementation of the Public Authorities Act, we in Treasury recently, redoubled our efforts to find out the cost. The Accountant General wrote out to the statutory authorities to ask what is their experience about the cost of implementing the Public Authorities Act was the cost of the Section 47(1), subsection 1, which deals with salaries, and subsection 3, which deals with health care and pensions. So of the 26, approximate 26 statutory authorities, government companies, we heard back from about 17 of them as of this morning. And quickly, for the benefit of the listening public, one of the main thrusts of the Public Authorities Act was to achieve, I say, greater comparability, greater parity between the public service and the civil service. And it is the case that in the civil service, civil servants don't contribute out of pocket to their health care costs and their pension costs, whereas public servants, at least a short while ago, actually did so. And the Public Authorities Act then said we need to achieve greater parity in that situation. And you can either achieve greater parity by increasing the salaries, for example, in the public authorities, increasing the salaries to make up for and to compensate for the fact that our public servants are having to pay pension contributions out of pocket, to pay healthcare costs. You can achieve the parity by increasing salaries, or you can leave the salaries pretty much unchanged, but the authority itself can actually start making an increased contribution to the healthcare costs of their employees, the pension contributions for the employees. We can achieve greater parity either way or some combination of the two. When we wrote recently and asked what are the costs of implementation, the 17 or so responses that we did get back said that on the healthcare and pension aspects, and these are annual costs, that their estimate coming back was approximately, I'm going to round it to $20 million annually just on the healthcare, which fits in quite nicely with the Auditor General's report on page 10, I think it is, where it speaks to 17 million for healthcare costs. So the 17 SAGCs that we've heard from, they're saying that the annual cost just on the healthcare pension parity aspect is costing an additional 20 million, and on the health and on the salary scales, the subsection 1 of the 17 that we've heard from, the approximate uplift, these are all uplifts, additional costs, was about 2 million, sir. So we've heard from 17 of the 26, and those were the numbers that we've got so far.
So, thanks for that clarity, Financial Secretary. May I just ask you one question in turn? Have they taken note, have any of them taken steps towards implementing, or are they still not complying at this point in time?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Chairman, thank you, sir. The 17 that I spoke of, that I'm speaking of, they would have implemented. They would all have implemented. I think there's still some confusion, and we're not getting necessarily straightforward answers about which scales are being used. Because we asked the direct question, are you using the government salary scales as is, or are you devising your own scale to suit your individual situation, and has Cabinet approved any scale that you have devised? The best example of the latter would be the pilots. The pilots, they have their own unique scale, which I understand that the Cabinet has approved, because obviously there's no comparable position in central government, in the civil service, to go along with pilots. The closest would be MRCU, but the Cayman Islands pilots are unique. So that's one example of where an SAGC has developed its own salary scale just for the pilots, and the rest of the Cayman Islands, they have a different scale. But we're not getting necessarily clear-cut answers as we would like. Are you using, I think the majority of them have switched over to the government scales and are using them. But some of the answers are not clear cut as we would like as to which scales are being used.
Deputy Governor, has government considered the full financial implications of implementing the Public Authorities Act as Section 47 if all SAGCs adopt the civil services pension and health benefits under Section 47.3?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I can't say that we, other than what the FS has outlined, I can't say that there's been a particular project to look at the overall number, but I do know, as the FS Financial Secretary said, there has been individual entities that have done costing, but I can't say with a high degree of confidence that, yes, we have, within the civil service, the government, that we have done an overall costing. I can't give that assurance.
And can you let us know what actions that your office have put in place to ensure that all public servants are treated equally through consistent application of the acts?
So, Mr. Chairman, we have been working, my office, what we can do is to support the statutory authorities. While, like I said, I don't have any direct remit, we do have an excellent, I think, working relationship. We work together, we share ideas. My office has been doing a tremendous amount of training of the boards. And we have an excellent training program. It is heavily subscribed for board members to make sure that the board members understand the Public Authorities Act, that they understand the good governance, that they understand how to conduct themselves as board members. So we have done a lot of training in that area. I think it's been very successful. It is in high demand, which is great, which means board members want the training. They want to understand how to carry out their fiduciary responsibilities to the board. And I think that has actually made a big difference.
And could you share with us and share with the committee this morning your views on the sufficiency of funding provided to SAGCs for implementing the Public Authorities Act 47.1 and 3?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, from time to time, when the Public Authorities Act was being implemented, and I'm talking specifically to, I think it's 47.1 in relation to salaries, there were occasions when what we found was that in the majority of SAGCs, people were paid a bit more than in the civil service. But there were a few, so it didn't actually result in increased cost for the SAGC. But in one particular case, I can remember, I think it was found that some of the positions within that entity did need some elevation, and Cabinet authorized funding to help that agency implement the Public Authorities Law. It was not a significant sum because it was normally some of your lower level employees, but from time to time, Cabinet has assisted some SAGCs who did not have adequate funding. But the vast majority, I think, were able to accommodate the implementation, and I'm speaking about the salary scales from within their own budgets.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just try to help out by just adding on very slightly and quickly. What I would say is that the mechanism by which the government would feel the effects of implementation of Section 47 would obviously be through the budgeting process. So, for example, if any of the SAGCs have a relationship where they provide outputs to government, and government obviously will pay that authority for producing that output. And the statutory authority actually implemented Section 47, and as a result of that, it saw that its costs increase. We would expect then that that statutory authority government company would filter those increased costs, at least a substantial portion of them, would filter those costs, increased costs, from implementation of the Public Authorities Act to government in the form of greater costs for outputs that government was buying from that authority. And I can say that I'm not aware at all of a situation in which we got a request from an authority that said, pay us X dollars for these outputs that we're doing for you, government. And the government declined that request on the basis that the costs are too high. I don't recall any such situation. So I guess in conclusion, what I'm saying is that the increased costs of implementation, I think, could ultimately be borne substantially by the government if there's a relationship between the authority and the government. Then a substantial part of those additional costs are borne by government, and I don't know of government rejecting those costs.
Thank you for that, FS. Final question under this section, Deputy Governor, with regard to the two entities that we know that are not complying at this point, SEMA and Airports Authority, I think, or Civil Aviation Authority are the two. Are you aware of any plans that they have with regard to trying resolving the issues with regard that prevent them from complying with the Act?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, certainly I'm aware that the two entities are not comfortable with the situation that they're in right now. These are two of our most highly respected SAGCs in terms of the work that they do. But I do know, as I said earlier, that there were concerns around if they implemented their law with the current salary scales of the civil service, that it was going to hamper their ability to attract best talent. And that is something that I know they were working on with their various ministries. But as I gave an undertaking earlier, Mr. Chairman, I will go back and find out exactly where we're at and encourage them to find a way to comply.
Thank you, sir. We're now going to move on to topic of non-compliance with the Public Management Finance Act, Section 11 and Section 12. And for that, I'm going to turn to Ms. Barbara Connolly to lead the line of questioning. Barbara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you to the Deputy Governor. The Auditor General issued emphasis of matter paragraphs for 6 public bodies because of their non-compliance with Sections 11 and 12 of the Public Management and Finance Act. The government did not introduce the Supplementary Appropriation Bill for 2022 in Parliament by the 31st of March 2023, as required by the Act. My question to the Deputy Governor is, can you advise this committee on why 6 public bodies did not approve their supplementary appropriations in the time frame required by the Public Management and Finance Act, and what was the reasons for the delay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you just highlight where in the report that is? I was not. I just want to make sure I familiarize myself.
Auditor General, may I ask you for your assistance in directing us to the appropriate page?
You say page 14. Let's be some more than that. Yeah, you say.
Sections 11 and 12. paragraph.
It's page 14,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
paragraph
I have-
35. The position with this was that in the recent past, PMFA was changed to give 3 months grace at the end of the year to get supplementary appropriations approved. Obviously, good practice would be that you're spending budget that you've already got approved by Parliament, or else you're not spending authorised money. So that's the reason that we've done it, and we appreciate that sittings of Parliament can be problematic.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you to the member. Obviously, that is something that is sections 11 and 12 means additional appropriations approved by cabinet. It means that the FS and his team would normally approve an appropriation bill that would be brought here. FS can correct me if I'm wrong. I think one of the issues that we've had is that the frequency in which Parliament meets. If Parliament doesn't meet frequently, then we are unable to get the bills down here on as is prescribed. It is something that I think we can improve on, but I think that's one of the reasons why we were not as efficient as we should have been. FS, I'm not sure if you have anything you want to add on that particular matter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, DG. Not to add a lot in terms of causing more time delay. Obviously, the law requires that at the end of a financial year, there is a cleanup supplementary bill that needs to take place that looks at the year that's just gone by, and it aggregates and puts all of the supplementaries that have gone on in the previous year in one convenient bill. And the requirement of the law is that that supplementary appropriation bill be brought to Parliament by the 31st of March. I think to a large extent, probably the DG was not the best person to field that question. I can't remember the exact timing of the supplementary appropriation bill for the 2022 year, but it didn't get here physically even by the 31st of March. As an update, we're in the process currently now of finalizing the supplementary appropriation bill for the 2023 year that finished a few months ago, getting that to the Parliament before the 31st of March. Perhaps the language in the PMFA could be improved because it speaks to the bill having to be introduced to the Parliament, and I guess it's possible to have a debate about, well, what does introduction mean? Does it mean just physical delivery of the act to the House, and the House doesn't look at it because it's not sitting, or does it mean the House actually has to approve it by the 31st of March? So our aim is to certainly get it physically for 2023 to certainly physically get it transmitted to the Parliament before the 31st of March. And to a large extent, Mr. Chairman and members, it should be a real tidy up exercise, because there should not be a lot of items in it at all, in the bill at all, that members of Parliament would not have seen previously in the course of the year, either under the section 11.5 supplementaries, which the Cabinet can do, and associated with that, ministers have to make statements in the Parliament that explain what those section 11.5 supplementaries are, and then in section 12 supplementaries, Finance Committee meets and approves them during the course of the year. So what we're talking about here is a tidy up exercise, an administrative exercise, taking all of those individual approvals supplementaries in the course of the year, putting them in one nice, neat compartment called a supplementary bill, and getting that to the House by the 31st of March each year.
Thank you both to the Deputy Governor and to the FS, Financial Secretary, for that explanation. And I can appreciate too that perhaps we don't have regular meetings of Parliament, hence there may be a reason as a result of the delay. But can I have some assurance either from the Deputy Governor or from the Financial Secretary that going forward, that these 6 bodies, as well as every other public body, will have these reports submitted before the 31st of March? Going forward, can I have that assurance from both of you, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, through you, and again, thanks to the FS for that modification. Well, that his elucidation on the matter. So I think it's a combination of both things. Regular meetings of Parliament, but obviously, as the FS says, there needs to be additional work to be done on our side as well. So yes, I'm happy to give this committee assurances that we will do better in that regard, and I will work with the FS and his team to make sure that any outstanding appropriation bills are sent down to Parliament as soon as possible.
Mr. Chairman, in 5 seconds, for 2023, we do have the supplementary appropriation bill done in draft. It hasn't reached Cabinet as yet, but we're hoping that we're going to get it to Cabinet, caucus Cabinet next week.
But thank you too for the gentlemen for the commitment to get it done. FS, I think back to a few years ago, actually, originally the law required it to be done by 28th of February. And remember, we amended the Act in 2016-17 to extend it to 3 months to March 31st. But I mean, this is not the first. Last year is not the first time where it didn't make it down here in time. And I'm just curious from your viewpoint as to whether the 3-month period remains valid in terms of the ability of the civil service or to get the draft bill, the bill down to Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I do believe that 3 months is a reasonable period of time. For it to go beyond that, we're probably going to be getting into, matters not being transparent to Parliament and so forth. So I think 3 months definitely is a reasonable period of time. And thank you for the reminder that it was actually extended. Obviously, the ability to get the bill to the Parliament will depend to some extent too on the amount, the volume of supplementaries that were incurred during the course of the past year. And I think certainly in the case of the 2022 and 23 year, there were quite a number of supplementaries, and it ran pages and pages and pages. But that's certainly not to make any excuses. I do think that 3 months is sufficient time, and what we can do is to obviously prepare the bill as the supplementaries are being incurred and are being approved, and not necessarily wait until the end of the year before we start the process of approving the supplementary preparing the supplementary appropriation bill. That can be done during the course of the year, and I think 3 months is sufficient as well.
Auditor General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I just wanted to thank the FS for suggesting something that I'd heavily support, which is that it's done in a more timely way through the year. Because, as I said at the outset, you're in a position where if the year ends and you haven't got the budget approved, those entities have overspent their budget without the authority of Parliament, and that's really not good practice. So just to support the FS, that if there are supplementary appropriation bills that can perhaps be introduced during the course of the year, so that at year end it really is just a tiny sweep up of any late supplementaries, that would be much better practice, because then you would have budgets that are approved by Parliament and spending that is authorised by Parliament, which is not where we are at the minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor General. Ms. Codley?
No, just to say through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you all for that very thorough explanation, and for Auditor General also for her input there. Thank you. That's it for my questioning.
Mr. Hugh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the FS. Could part of the issue, or is it there is a belief that a lot of these Section 11, Section 12s happen at the end of the year, and a scramble to utilize the budget if they were not used in one area to move the monies over? So is that a problem where you have a large number at one time, or a large number of these transactions being done in a short period of time at the end of the year?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was just hesitating there to reflect on how best to answer the question. Mr. Chairman, it's undoubtedly the case that as we certainly get to particularly in the second year, because we have a 2-year budget. So when we approaching the end of year 2, in our most recent example, it would have been 2023. As you are approaching that year, the end of that year, honestly, yes, there is a great temptation to utilize budgets fully to the extent possible, because come the end of the second year, those unused budgets don't carry forward into the subsequent year. So I think the honest answer is yes, that does create a great temptation.
No further questions, then we'll move on to the next section, which deals with the issue of backlogged audits. And I'm going to turn to Ms. Heather Bodden to lead that line of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Direct my question to the Deputy Governor. As of the end of September 2022, 17 audits were backlogged. As of today, 13 audits are backlogged. The long-standing and problematic backlogged audits relate to the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Cayman Islands Airport Authority. Both have 5 years of audits outstanding going back to 2019. My question to the Deputy Governor or to the Financial Secretary: how does he handle chief officers to account with regards to the backlogged audits?
Mr. Chairman, thank you to the member. Again, I can't speak to the Airports Authority. Again, I have no remit over the statutory authorities. But specifically for the Ministry of Health, I think we have now completed 2019. That has now been signed off. Auditor General can correct me if I'm wrong. And we are now beginning to look at the next year's audit. So obviously, this is not an acceptable situation to have the audits backlogged that long. I've looked into the why it happened and how it happened, but what I'm focusing now on is solutions. So the Auditor General and her team has raised this matter with me from time to time. The Auditor General has actually employed staff whose primary job is to deal with the backlog, and I'm pleased to say that the Ministry of Health has also done the same, because it is very difficult for the CFO in the ministry to focus on the day-to-day operations of the ministry, pay all its bills, make sure everything is operating, but also then is working on requests from the Auditor General on audits that are 3 or 4 years behind. So what the Ministry of Health has done is has employed a deputy chief financial officer we recruited the person from within the civil service, so there's no learning curve, and that person primary responsibility is to ensure that the outstanding audits are brought up to date. Up until yesterday, there was a meeting between the Auditor General's team and the Ministry of Health finance team, working together to make sure that this backlog is cleared up in short order. I think it may take a year or more, maybe 2 years, to get us back to where we're current, but I now feel very confident that we have the resources in place. Certainly the Auditor General has my commitment, the commitment of the Chief Officer, to work closely together to make sure that this one civil service entity who hasn't gotten their accounts up to date gets their accounts up to date.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I do have to correct the DG. We've just signed off 2018, so it is still 5 years.
Okay.
Outstanding.
Sorry, I got my years wrong. My apologies.
I wish you were right.
Yes.
Clearly understand, and thank you
Yes.
for that information,
Yes.
DG.
Thank you. Can the Deputy Governor, can you indicate whether all ministries have a deputy chief, like a chief financial officer, or you had to recruit someone to assist the CFO in the Ministry of Health?
Right.
So my question is, all the ministries have a deputy chief?
Yes. So Mr. Chairman, through you. So if members would cast their memories back to 2019 in the Ministry of Health, the chief officer in the Ministry of Health in 2019 was transferred out, and the CFO in that ministry became the acting chief officer. So right away, there was a huge void in the finance team because the CFO was now the acting chief officer. Someone then had to act up as the CFO. So there was a shortage in the finance team. And of course, what happened in 2020? There came COVID. So that ministry was leading the government's response to COVID. So the finance team was not focusing on audits, they were focusing on procuring test kits and procuring all of the supplies that we needed for COVID. And that went on for over a year and a half of us being in the COVID fight. So once the chief officer then got confirmed in the role, the acting chief officer got confirmed in the role, they had to then go about of building back the finance team in the ministry and also expanding the finance team in the ministry. So yes, normally there would be a CFO and perhaps 2 deputies depending on the size of the ministry, but given what I just said, there was some capacity issues because the CFO was acting chief officer, which means there was an acting CFO, there was an acting deputy. So there were some resources issues in the ministry at the time. And I hope I explained how we got here, but also explained that we now have a full team in place. In addition to the CFO that we've brought on just for this, another member of the finance team is starting next month. so that we have a full finance team that is able to deal with the backlog and also then deal with the current day-to-day operations of the ministry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Deputy Governor. Deputy Governor, 5 years of outstanding audits.
Right.
This is 2024.
Right.
Surely, I know we had the chief financial officer then acting as the chief officer, and also COVID. But in a situation like this, would that have not been acknowledged at that time to say bring somebody in and not wait for this, for 5 years of audits not to have been completed? I mean, surely there must be financial officers, financial people within the ministry, or even if you have to bring someone from the outside to bring these audits up to date. Is that some sort of arrangement that you all could have perhaps addressed at that time?
In the middle of COVID, I would say no. We were not focused on this. So for 2020, 2021, for those 2 years, I would say we were focused on trying to save people's life. We were not worried. We were not focused on a backlog of audits. Ma'am, I don't want to give excuses. The situation that we're in is not an acceptable situation. I think I've explained. I can't do any better on how we got here. I just want to assure the committee that we now have the resources in place, the skill set, and the desire to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I want to remind the committee that, in addition, yes, we are behind in that ministry, but the ministry continues to submit its accounts on time to the Auditor General. So it's not like, they have not complied with the law at all. All of their financial statements have been submitted on time, and the Auditor General now has a team working on the backlog. We now have a staff member to work on the backlog, and I think we will get it sorted out in short order. But it's not an ideal situation by any means, and I don't want to give the impression that that's something that we are happy about. We're not.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, through to the Deputy Governor. Thank you, Deputy Governor. And I just want to say that, or ask, is there any kind of time frame to have these audits brought up to date? 2019, 2021, 22, and now 23?
I was speaking with the chief officer yesterday. We were talking through this issue. Her belief is that within 2 years we will be where we're up to date. But I would really defer to the Auditor General to say whether that is a realistic timeline or not. But certainly that's, from our standpoint, we think that's a realistic timeline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. Deputy Governor, I understand your inability to comment on provide commentary on the Cayman Islands Airports Authority situation. So I'll just put this out there to everyone over there. I can appreciate, and I would probably believe that the issue at the Cayman Islands Airport Authority may have dated back to a combination of COVID, but also a lot of energy put into the audit on the last large capital project, that being the redevelopment of the airport. And I know that there was an audit done at that time. And bearing that in mind, are there any concerns about the backlog of audits, some 5 years for the Cayman Islands Airports Authority, as they're about to embark on another very large project requiring great capital expenditure.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Hugh. Thank you, Mr. Hugh. Yes, you're quite right. They did have big projects, but I think the problems more arose from vacancies within their finance team. It's not unusual for many entities to have big projects during the course of the year, but obviously they don't necessarily then have issues with getting their financial statements completed. So I was just conferring with Winston because it was so long ago. I've kind of forgotten what the original problem was, and I think it was problems with sufficiency of resources in their finance team. There was also a really big problem around the cash within the entity that took up a lot of that resource as well, trying to reconcile and agree the cash. And of course, once you're in backlog, it becomes difficult, as the DG quite rightly says, because people are keeping the job going, keeping the day-to-day finances going, as well as trying to sort of look back and deal with backlog. So I think once you get in backlog, it does become much, much harder for entities.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I thank the Auditor General for that clarification. And I just, perhaps, I don't know if she or her team is in a position to confirm, similar to that of what the DG said about the Ministry of Health, that they are compliant otherwise in the submittals of their financial.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, back to Mr. Hugh. Thank you. Yes, I can confirm that both the Ministry of Health and the Airport Authority do submit their financial statements by the statutory deadline each year, so that's good. And just to add that we're almost there with completing the 2019 audit of the Airport Authority. They've now got additional resource in, like the Ministry of Health have just started to do. So I feel optimistic on both fronts. But I felt optimistic before, so.
Any other question then from the committee on this? If not, then we move on then to the status of the EPS audits. Deputy Governor, the report highlights that the entire public sector accounts have received adverse audit opinions because of various issues for at least the past 3 years. The committee believes it's time for the government to focus on improving the quality of the entire public sector consolidated accounts to move on from an adverse audit opinion. The Auditor General acknowledged the progress made by the Ministry of Finance to rectify this and recommended that the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development continue implementing the action plan to improve the quality of the entire public sector's consolidated financial statements. The action plan will move the EPS towards a desired unqualified audit opinion in the longer term. We're also aware that one of the reasons for the adverse opinions relates to the non-disclosure of the $2.3 billion liability for post-retirement medical liability. This disclosure of such the disclosure of such a liability is a requirement of the accounting standards adopted by the government. The entire public sector accounts will not achieve a clean opinion without such disclosures in the financial statements. So, can you tell the committee what your plans are to ensure that the entire public sector account moves to an unqualified opinion in the long term?
Mr. Chairman, that's a tough one, sir. I'm going to ask the FS to expand. But, sir, as you know, some of this involves decisions at the political level in terms of whether we are going to take the decision to move the liabilities onto to our books. It's a very difficult one, Mr. Chairman. I wish I had a magic wand that I could, wave and we could sort this out. But I don't have, I can't say with any degree of certainty that I can give a commitment to this committee that we are going to solve this in a very short order. It is a very, it's a very difficult issue to resolve. It's going to take some very, very hard decisions. But maybe the FS can talk about this. He deals with this on a daily basis.
We're going to give him a similar question too when we get to him.
Yes.
But if I could, can you give us an indication, though, Deputy Governor,
Yes.
what's the state of discussions and what, across the government with regard to disclosing the post-retirement medical liability?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, obviously certainly there is a keen desire at all levels for us to get this right. We've made so much progress over the years. The Auditor General has recognized that in this report, and I thank our office for doing that. The tremendous progress that we have made on improving our accounts, improving our financial statements, and making sure that they are the reports are there so that people can see exactly how we're spending their money. But where we haven't made a lot of progress on is on the EPS. So I know there's strong desire from everyone to get it done. I just think maybe we need to, again, refocus on it. But again, like I said, FS, the Financial Secretary, deals with this on a daily basis. So he may know more about this than I do at the moment.
Thank you, Ms. DG and Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman.
FS.
Thank you. I'm going to say a few words briefly, and then I'm going to ask the Accountant General to elaborate a bit more. Mr. Chairman, I also feel a bit self-conscious because I've said the same thing quite a number of times. The placing of the post-retirement healthcare liability fairly and squarely on the face of the balance sheet of government, because we do actually disclose the amount in or details of it in notes to the financial statements of government, but to actually place the liability figure on the face of the balance sheet, we have not done that. So, for example, we do have the liability with respect to unfunded pension liability on the face of government's balance sheet. And that figure is around $440 million, the latest one, as at the end of 2023, of course, subject to an actuarial valuation. So we do not have the post-retirement healthcare liability number on the face of the balance sheet in the liabilities section to be subtracted away, obviously, from the assets. That figure, as you said, Mr. Chairman, is $2+ billion consistently every time it's valued, and we do get the valuation done by Mercer or actuaries, so completely independent of government and objective. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the framework for fiscal responsibility, one of the ratios there is net assets of the government. Its assets less its liabilities has to be positive. Placing the post-retirement healthcare liability figure of $2+ billion on the face of the balance sheet would essentially take the government's current net assets of around the same amount, $2 billion, would take that to zero. And so any government automatically begins to perhaps panic and say, placing the liability on the balance sheet, is that going to take my net assets figure down to zero? Am I at risk of not complying with that particular ratio? And therefore that creates a bit of fear and a bit of reluctance to actually go ahead and do so. Mr. Chairman, so that's one major consideration in not just the current government's thought process, but previous governments as well. It's also the it's also the case that the measurement of the post-retirement healthcare benefits impacts the surplus in any one particular year as well. And I think in this current report, the Auditor General might make reference to an annual impact, the most recent one of the region of $150 million as additional costs to hit the financial statements of government. So if we in past years, we've actually had surpluses of in the region of 100 million and more. More recent times, we've had much smaller surpluses. And Mr. Chairman, for the year ended 2023, the operational surplus of the government, subject to audit, of course, is in the region of $30 million. So if you also account not just for the liability figure, but for the cost of post-retirement benefits to be earned in the future, if you were to account for those costs in a current year, you're looking at an additional cost of well over $100 million, sufficiently large to take away your present surplus and turn it into a loss. So there is that fear, then, okay, we're going to not comply with another ratio, which says you ordinarily you are expected to have a surplus. So it is quite fairly difficult for a government to take the decision to put this matter fairly and squarely on the face of its primary financial statements, because of the fear of there being non-compliance with at least two of the FFR ratios and the consequences of that. They simply don't want to deal with. So, Mr. Chairman, as you know, sir, it has been a very difficult decision to take. I think it would be more likely that a government would take that big decision perhaps at the start of its term, as opposed to, say, right now. There are other considerations in mind right now. So at the start of a new term for a government, it's more likely. I would perhaps be a little cheeky and ask the audit office if they had any suggestions as to how we could bridge this gap between where we are now and the fear of non-compliance with those ratios as a result of, bringing it onto the face of the balance sheet. I think that's singularly the biggest reason why we do get the adverse opinion at an EPS level, just this one item alone. There are many others that are listed in the report. So I've said a lot, Mr. Chairman, without giving necessarily any hope that in the next year we won't be speaking of this matter. That would be false of me to give that. I'm sorry to inform the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the FS. I think I appreciate very much the dilemma and the difficulty, but a couple of comments to make that spring to mind from what the FS has just said. Firstly, that the fiscal framework, whether it's actually declared in the balance sheet or the financial statements or not, it is part of the fiscal framework. So if the fiscal framework is broken, the fact that it's not divulged doesn't mean that it's not an issue for the fiscal framework, because it is a liability, and that's the point. It's a liability that's not been disclosed, absolutely accepting the issues that the FS said. And the other comment I'd make is just drawing it back to the earlier questioning around section 47(3) of the Public Authorities Act. Because if all the statutory authorities end up with the same healthcare and pension benefits as the civil service, it will just increase the amount, and the deficit will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think there's a really big policy decision that this government, the future government, some government at some point will need to face. but not disclosing it doesn't make it go away.
I do have one further question, either for the Deputy Governor or the FS, but has the UK ever raised this as an issue with the Ministry of Finance or with the government?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's better perhaps for me to attempt to answer than the Honourable DG. So, Mr. Chairman, just to say that in terms of disclosure, the Auditor General is right. It's not disclosed on the balance sheet of the government, but certainly it is a part of our notes to the financial statement. So the disclosure is in notes as opposed to on the face. So disclosure does exist. Mr. Chairman, the answer to your question is, given that those financial statements are available to the UK, we've stated, a surplus on the face of those financial statements, which could be whittled away and turned into a deficit if you take into account full costs. I've never had the UK government question it and say to us, you have a loss situation here and not a surplus. Your net assets are 0 or negative and not 2+ billion positive. I've never had that feedback from the UK.
Thank you. Any further questions on this? Mr. Hugh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Honourable Financial Secretary. I've heard in the past discussions about creating a sinking fund to deal with this liability. What are the hurdles in achieving that, or what are the negative impacts of perhaps even the accounting dressing on creating a sinking fund with a goal to balance this liability?
Mr. Chairman, Matthew Tibbetts, Accountant General. Mr. Chairman, I like the idea of the sinking fund. It's something that takes a long time to obviously get the benefit, but I would also recommend that something such as a sinking fund is coupled with a different approach so that this kind of benefit is not something that's in place for new civil servants, because that would allow us to start reducing the liability and chipping away at it while covering the backlog of the build-up of liability that we have right now. So if we do a combination of both, I think that would actually be a good, effective approach for reducing this over the long term. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, thank you for the response. And my only response to that is I've been an elected member for 13 years, so we could have started 13 years ago and we'd be 13 years down the road. So we have to start and make a decision at some point to address the elephant in the room.
Okay, let's turn now to the final area we wanted to examine with the Deputy Governor. And that relates to the Sister Islands Affordable Housing Development Corporation. And I turn now to Mr. Hugh to lead that line of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, sir, to the Honourable Deputy Governor. The Sister Islands Affordable Housing Development Corporation did not meet its objectives of building or selling homes for 4 years from 2019 to 2022, and that being its primary objective. In the 2020 report, the Auditor General recommended that the government considers the need for the Sister Islands Affordable Housing Development Corporation to continue as a separate entity, to consider whether it should continue as a separate entity. The recommendation was also repeated in 2021 and 2022 in the general reports. My question to you, Deputy Governor, is what are your views on the Sister Island Affordable Housing Development Corporation continuing to operate as a separate entity, given the lack of value provided to the public according to this report.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I don't think I have a view on this. To be truthful, I've given the matter some thought. Read what the Auditor General has said. I mean, this really is a political decision to be made as to whether the two should be amalgamated. The thing that I think I'm responsible for is to get that discussion going and make sure that the Auditor General doesn't, or make sure that we respond so that the Auditor General knows what policy decision has actually been taken. So again, I will give that undertaking to talk to our elected officials around this area and make sure that we get a decision one way or the other as to whether it's the two entities should be amalgamated or whether they should be separate. They should remain separate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Honourable Deputy Governor for that response. Honourable Deputy Governor, what is the process for holding a public body accountable if they have been granted the funds, if the budget has been given to them to carry out their mandate? Where do you get involved in seeing whether this is, you mentioned a political decision, but what is the process for ensuring that the political decision has been made, the funds have been budgeted, that they carry out the goods and services that they are mandated to?
So just so I clarify, I don't think this is a civil service entity, is it? It's a corporation, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, like I said, I have a lot of responsibility, but when it comes to authorities and corporations, those are outside of my remit as the head of the civil service. But the member has asked a good question. So, I mean, that is a matter for the ministry. The ministry would look at why that is not happening. The minister, the chief officer, would have the discussions around, well, if your job was to build 10 houses, you were giving the money to build the 10 houses, why didn't you build the 10 houses? Those are matters that would be dealt with at the ministry level. But I don't have the details here to give any additional information on that. But to answer his question directly, that would be a matter for the minister and the chief officer to deal with.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just help by just adding on to what Honorable DG say, and that is that the normal process for the relationship between any statutory authority government company, which the Sister Islands Affordable Housing Corporation is such an entity, and the government is, as you would know, Mr. Chairman and committee members, would be the process of equity investments. The government would place in its budget X dollars to give to the Sister Islands Affordable Housing Corporation, to the National Housing Development Trust and so forth, would set out those equity investments as a part of its budget. And when a statutory authority would want to make use of those funds, it would write to the responsible ministry and attempt to use and draw down those funds. Now, and if those funds are actually handed over to an authority, an SAGC, and they don't use those funds in accordance with what they were purporting to use it for, that is a serious problem. Because that would clearly be wrong. I'm not 100% certain of the situation with the Sister Islands Affordable Housing, whether they actually received funds from government and didn't apply them properly. I don't know that particular relationship. I don't remember funds being budgeted, and I'm obviously open to being corrected. Don't remember funds being budgeted to the organization for that purpose. So, but that's the process in which authorities are held to account for doing what they set out to do, they would have to justify their request for budgetary funding and would certainly need to demonstrate proof afterwards that they've actually done so. Otherwise, it would be a serious breach and would be worthy of investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the DG. I know that we have the Deputy Director of the Central Procurement Office joining us after this. But DG, I wanted to raise a question of procurement with yourself. There are some of these transactions that are in the report without approval by the PPC. Are for statutory authorities, etc., but there are a couple there within ministries. I want to, and in reading the report, I can appreciate that there are probably some of these where it's a single source or a specialized. I think we used the Cayman areas pilots earlier as you know an example of where there's no comparison, etc., to make these decisions. But within the civil service, my question to you, Deputy Governor, is have we, and you and I have had discussions in the past about the inconsistency in requirements for whether you need a strategic business case and an outline business case, and whether that is 1 page or 150 pages. Is there a way that ministries who need equipment or services urgently, I will use one that we laughed about with the equipment to pick up the sargassum on the beach. And, you know, by the time we got approval for it, the sargassum was gone and, and the vehicle was sold. So, you know, I wanted to get some feedback from you on these topics. I don't need to get into details because you're very much aware. And also to raise, and you can address it if you wish, some of the issues that we are seeing from the public or bringing to my attention, where the system is being abused to make life easier for the civil servants. So in other words, they find a supplier overseas that has made it very easy for them and assisted them, and rather than seeking a local or putting it out for tender, they would just rather use that provider, and possibly just out of, you know, it made sense for them because it made life easier. And also another issue where I was told that a local supplier, a local rep for a product was circumvented because it was easier for that ministry to receive a duty waiver if they were purchasing it from overseas rather than locally. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you have the ability to, but I know that you are aware of the challenges there. If you could comment on those for me.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thanks to the member. Mr. Chairman, first, I think we have an excellent procurement system. It is, I think, the envy of many countries in the region. I had a meeting with my fellow deputy governors last year. We had members from our procurement office to come and let them know and educate them about the procurement system that we have. Many of them want to adopt similar laws and policies and procedures in their jurisdictions. So to answer your question first, I can say that I think that the system is clear. We have a really good procurement law. We have really good staff in the procurement office that is always willing to help. I think, you know, you're going to hear from the deputy director, and I think he will tell you that they have good resources to be able to assist ministries. In addition, my office has been doing a lot of training for civil servants on creating business cases to make sure that we don't have to outsource them a lot, that we can do them in-house. And that course runs almost year-round. It is well subscribed, and from where I sit, I'm seeing a lot of interest. The Auditor General has been sort of, saying this repeatedly over the years in terms of the importance of a strong, robust business case. It's almost like trying to build a house without house plans. If you get the plans right, if you get the business case right, chances are you're going to do a good procurement that has value for money. So I think all of the systems are there. I had a very detailed look at the instances that was flagged in the report where the procurement law was not followed. I've had conversations with all of the chief officers involved. They have given me explanations for why things didn't happen the right way. In some cases, there was just some missing documents that were not supplied that should have been supplied to the Auditor General, for example. They were not available. For example, the Ministry of Education was flagged about janitorial services. The janitorial services had been provided at what was the George Hicks campus, and when we moved then to the new John Gray campus, they sort of extended the contract that they had in existence. Technically, they should have done another procurement because it was a much larger contract. So there were some technical things that we didn't do correctly. We're now rectifying those issues. So there were some lessons to be learned. I thank the Auditor General for flagging them. You can't solve a problem unless you know it's there. So from where I sit, I have looked at these instances. They were instances where we could have done better. But like I said, the good news is that we acknowledge when things don't go right. I'm not here to make excuses at all. From time to time, we do thousands of procurement in the civil service, and we're talking about a very small handful here. But it's the people's money that we are spending, and they have a right to know that they are getting value for money. So that is a huge onus on us within the civil service. This is not an elected official's responsibility. This is our responsibility. Civil servants deal with procurements. Ministers do not get involved. So we have to own this and acknowledge that in these cases we were not at our best, and then learn from that to make sure that we don't make these mistakes again. And I am confident, having gone through all of the documents, spoken with all the chief officers, that I think we have learned some lessons and that we will get it right going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the Honourable Deputy Governor for that detailed answer. My final question, Honourable Deputy Governor, is I would appreciate from a budget perspective you would need political buy-in, but what is your position on the role the government plays in keeping things such as minimum wage in tune with inflation through procurement? Examples are janitorial, security services, where quite often the contracts, the highest amount of points gained is based on costs. And if you work those contracts back, because they're hourly contracts, you will see that the person winning the bid is usually at minimum wage, or sometimes questionable how they can do pension insurance and still meet minimum wage and win that contract at that price. It's quite easy. If it's 20 hours and it's $300, you just divide the 300 by 20 and you know what the hourly rate is that the government is paying. Where I'm trying to go with this is, do you have a view on the role that the government plays in keeping minimum wage and the lower spectrum of the salary scales at pace with inflation?
Mr. Chairman, I would need some time to reflect on that. I think it's a very good question. I can't say that that is being done. I'm sure when the next witness comes up, he may be able to expand on that. I would need to give that matter some thought, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have a detailed response right now. I would have to do a lot of thinking and consulting with the team around it, because I agree with what you're saying. I just can't tell you that we have something in place to fix it. But I do agree with the issue that you're raising.
Are there any other questions of the Deputy Governor? Okay. Deputy Governor, I thank you on behalf of the committee for being here this morning and for answering any questions that have been directed towards you. I think we kept you a little bit over time, but you know, it's been good discussion. I thought some useful things coming out of it as well. So thank you, sir, and we'll excuse you at this time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and members. I have made some notes here, so I think I owe the committee some updates, which I will provide in short order. So thank you very much again.
We're going to take a 5-minute suspension while the other witness is making his way into the chamber. Proceedings are now resumed. At this time, I acknowledge the presence of Mr. Kenneth Jefferson, the Financial Secretary and Chief Officer from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, as well as Mr. Matthew Tibbetts, the Accountant General in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, and also Mr. Robert Tatum, the Deputy Director of the Central Procurement Office within the Ministry of Finance. Gentlemen, when we get started here now, whoever is going to answer the first questions that you actually are asked to respond to, if you'd state your name and position officially for the record so that it can be recorded, I'd really appreciate it if you can. So we are going to begin with questioning the Financial Secretary. And what I would say to members of the committee and to the public at large, FS, a lot of what we had to question you and your team about, we've already discussed it this morning in the questioning that we had with the Deputy Governor, and your contributions during that time answered some of the questions that we were going to be asking of you today. So we are going to shorten things up a bit by just eliminating those questions and those sections, because we feel that we obtain adequate explanations, and there is probably nothing further that you could add to it given your contributions to it this morning. So I'm going to turn my attention first, FS, to the quality of the financial statements that are produced. And the Auditor General in this report, she reported that the quality of financial information submitted to her office by the public bodies needs improvement. This is demonstrated by the value of audit adjustments, by the number and value of audit adjustments made to financial statements after they had been submitted to her office for audit. In 2022, over 280 audit adjustments valued at $115 million were made by all public bodies. This means that decisions could have been made based on inaccurate financial data during the year. Also, internal controls for most public bodies need strengthening, and accounting policies are often inadequate. The Auditor General added that public bodies seem reluctant to disclose sufficient detail about certain matters in their financial statements until her office raises the issues. Standards are designed to drive transparency and assist users' understanding of the financial statements. Public bodies can do more to ensure adequate disclosures relating to issues such as severance payments, subsequent events, commitments, segment reporting, and budget variance explanations. Now, Mr. Jefferson, what is your understanding as to the root cause for the significant adjustments made to the financial statements and their inadequate disclosures?
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry for the delay in conferring. Mr. Chairman and committee members, Kenneth Jefferson, Financial Secretary and Chief Officer in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. I'd start, Mr. Chairman, with acknowledging that it is certainly not a desirable position for the civil service to be demonstrating a need for 280 adjustments of the magnitude of $115 million. That is not, in plain terms, that is not good. And it demonstrates that all is not necessarily well. I'm going to ask the Accountant General to speak shortly But as to the root causes of such number of adjustments and the magnitude of them, I don't actually know necessarily the root causes of it. I don't want to. One possibility that springs to mind might be, it might simply be an attempt to meet the audit deadline. And so it's important that I get the financial statements to the Auditor General by the 28th of in most years, 28th of February, 2 months after the 31st December year end. And so that may be some element of why those adjustments come up and need to be made. Simply the temptation to meet the deadline. I'm going to ask the Accountant General if he's aware of some broad and specific reasons why that is the case. Obviously, Mr. Chairman, there are some adjustments that are necessary in the normal course of accounting. Adjustments for provisions for doubtful debts, etc. Those are expected, but I certainly wouldn't expect them to be 280, totaling $115 million.
Mr. Chairman.
Accountant General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Tibbetts, Accountant General. Mr. Chairman, obviously there's a number of reasons for these adjustments, but one of the reasons could be the valuations of the real property for the Cayman Islands Government. And that's a massive exercise we carry out every 3 to 5 years, which would actually have large dollars attached to the adjustments. So the $115 million could be made up of a good portion of the property valuation adjustments, and that would be a large amount. In regards to fixing the issue going forward, the Ministry of Finance conducts training every year for the CFOs, and in regards to the financial standards. And so this year, what we're happy to do is to look through these adjustments and see how we can best cater our training to ensure that we tackle these up front so that the CFOs provide better quality information to the audit office on submitting of their accounts. But as the Financial Secretary stated, due to the timing of having to submit your accounts 2 months after the year end, and with regards to the various cutoff dates that we have, because we're such a large organization, there can be situations where CFOs do not provide the best quality information on the first go round. And that is unfortunate, and it is something that we'll look to improve with the CFOs through training, and if the Auditor General's office would like to work with us in regards to addressing specific areas, we're happy to look at those specifically.
Auditor General.
Yeah. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Accountant General. We certainly will do that. I think from our perspective, it is a variety of things. There are some entities where I think there is definitely a training need, and it feels like, putting it bluntly, the audit is used to kind of iron things out. That's a minority. Pension and healthcare valuations can account for big value variations at the end, but less so actually the property revaluations this year. So it is a variety of reasons, some of which are understandable, some of which we would be happy to work with the Accountant General on trying to improve. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Tibbetts.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Through you, we're happy to hear the Auditor General is willing to work with us in regards to addressing specific needs. And as the Auditor General stated, if there are specific ministries or finance teams that need more assistance, we're happy to assist with actually getting them specific training catered to their needs, or if it's resources that they need assistance with, we can work with them to get those resources as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And then, FS, if I could ask you, what is the role of the Ministry of Finance in providing leadership and improving the quality of the financial statements and their related disclosures?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, definitely the Ministry of Finance is seen as a leader when it comes to the preparation of government's financial statements, and ministries, portfolios, and offices do actually look to the ministry as the lead organization to guide them. We certainly get involved recently in providing training on different aspects. So, as an example, the Auditor General report speaks to upcoming accounting standards that are going to affect, the 23 and perhaps even the 24 financial year. Some new standards coming into effect. The ministry has put on some training courses. Hired one of the big accounting, one of the big four accounting firms to provide some advice on it. And is Mr. Chairman, is generally the day-to-day financing functions of the government that we get queries, quite frequently from ministries and portfolios and offices. If they're not certain how to treat a particular area, they'll phone the ministry. They look to us to guide the valuation of fixed assets process, which is quite an extensive one. They quite frequently, too, as you would know, Mr. Chairman, the cabinet papers, in particular, the cabinet papers that go to the cabinet that require additional finances for the government, those papers have to include a section captioned financial implications of the request being made, and those papers routinely come to the Ministry of Finance for input into the paper, which then gets submitted to the cabinet. So there's that, and that does actually take up quite a bit of time by the ministry or for the ministry, but it's obviously something that we welcome, and the ministry, the government as a whole, takes serious. So those are some of the examples that we get involved with, and yes, you are correct that we are seen as the leader, and whatever query that's in existence at the time, we'll probably have to field it.
Thank you, FS. You said that you get involved in training, and you gave the example then of you're hiring in outside expertise to deliver it. But does the ministry itself deliver training to the wider, broader, civil service in terms of the CFOs and related staff on financial, standards and reporting?
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take this question if it's okay with you. The Ministry of Finance tries to, when we have new standards, the Ministry of Finance tries to coordinate the training for these new standards. Audit Office will be familiar with training we just provided on IPSAS 41, which is just coming online for the 2023 financial year. So we actually coordinated that training for IPSAS 41, and then we also issued a guidance document for, I believe it was IPSAS 41, 42. So IPSAS 42 we gave guidance on as well. And so the Ministry of Finance is involved in looking at new standards coming out and providing guidance to the civil service finance teams. But and special thanks to the Audit Office, they've actually encouraged us to roll some portion of that training out to the SAGCs as well. The portion that relates to them specifically, we've rolled that out. We'll be rolling that out to the SAGCs as well to assist them with training and giving them the same templates so that we can ensure that we're all on the same page.
I appreciate that. I was looking more from information from you with regard to whether you actually deliver training, or do you always use a third-party entity to, such as another accounting firm, to deliver the training?
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. The Ministry of Finance and Treasury works along with SEPA to deliver training. In the instance I referred to in regards to the specific accounting standards, we worked with a local firm, one of the big four accounting firms, to provide that training for us. But generally, the annual updates are provided in coordination with SEPA.
And I guess just something I know from my former life in terms of the number of hours of actual continuing education training, does the ministry provide up to, say, 40 hours of training a year, or make it available to those who are qualified and in need of that continuing education on an annual basis?
Mr. Chairman, the ministry works with SEPA to provide specific training on the IPSA standards, and we also receive training from SEPA through their broader training program, which happens in December of each year. And we don't provide the full 40 hours with our training of the standards, so CFOs will need to register with SEPA for their separate training as well to make up the full 40 hours. Or if they have other training courses they can also sign up for those online in order to achieve the 40 hours.
Final question then, in terms of providing continuing education, those where it's not provided by the ministry, would the government pay for those external courses if it was needed, that are needed?
Mr. Chairman, we don't have an overall policy saying a ministry has to pay for their finance teams to do so, to receive their continuing education. However, each ministry can do as they decide and what they can afford and so on. In the Treasury Department and Ministry of Finance, we cover the annual fees for the CPAs or CAs and so on, as well as we try to cover the training as much as we can.
Any other questions there on this? Right. I've got to make sure I move to the right section. Okay, for that I'm going to turn now to the next topic is that of backlogged audits. And for that I'm going to turn to Ms. Heather Bodden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this question is directed to the Financial Secretary, once again addressing backlogged audits. The audits of 5 public bodies, including EPS, entire public sector, for the 2022 financial year are ongoing, are backlogged. 5 audits for 2022, 4 for 2021, 2 for 2020 and 2019. The Ministry of Health and Wellness has been in backlog since 2018, and the Cayman Islands Airport Authority has been backlogged since 2019. Can the Auditor General say concerns and risks arising from the backlog audits for the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Cayman Islands Airport Authority? What are the plans to get these audits up to date? My apologies, Financial Secretary.
Thank you, Member Bodden, and certainly I understood it to be directed at me. The answer, Mr. Chairman, as we've heard previously in respect to the Ministry of Health from the Deputy Governor, that he's fairly confident that matters are in hand, sufficient staff are in place to advance the completion of a number of years of incomplete audits for the Ministry of Health. Mr. Chairman, in terms of the Airports Authority, I don't quite know the situation there, and what I can say is that if it is the situation in which the Ministry of Finance can offer any assistance, we're more than happy to do so. But I don't know the specifics of the reasons why we're into this situation with the Airports Authority. I did obviously hear previously what the Auditor General said in respect of the matter, but I don't know what, apart from encouragement and willingness to offer assistance, that the Ministry of Finance can do. I do acknowledge also, Mr. Chairman, that this is an important area for us, because the report makes it clear that the existence of backlogged accounts raises questions about the accuracy and details when it comes to consolidation. So the fact that even if that was one entity that was outstanding, provided that entity was significant to the whole of government, the fact that that is incomplete, the audit is incomplete, would cause the Auditor General to have a reason to have doubts about the accuracy of the whole of government accounts. So the Ministry of Health being a number of years behind, the Airports Authority being a number of years behind, does pose a problem for what is referred to as the entire public sector accounts. In terms of the accuracy of those numbers, it raises questions. So it is important that those audits be completed, and we're more than willing to, whatever assistance we can give, we're happy to do so. I don't know, apart from that, what further we can do to advance it. I think the Accountant General wants to add to the question.
Mr. Chairman, just further to the Finance Secretary's comments, it is important to note that the entire public sector accounts are simply a consolidation of all of the entities within the public service. And so when accounts are backlogged by Ministry of Health and CIAA, that has a knock-on effect on the Auditor General's opinion of the quality of our accounts, and is one of the obviously reasons for their adverse opinion of the EPS. Something that my view in regards to the backlog of accounts, and I'm happy to hear views from the Auditor General either now or offline in regards to the way forward. In government, back in, I believe it's 2008, I believe it was, we decided to just skip over or just disclaim the accounts of most ministries for a 3-year period. And this was to allow us to stop the bleeding and allow us to focus on the current year to ensure the current year was accurate. Now that meant we had some issues with the opening balances for a few years, but over time we got those cleaned up as well. I know the Auditor General has said that they do have some hope now, and they're a bit more optimistic now that the ministry and CIAA have finance teams that are well resourced. And I'm happy to have a discussion with her offline to see the best way to approach it. But my personal view on this, the value of the accounts for information from 2019 for the Ministry of Health, we're now in 2024, that's 4 or 5 years late. And so the value of the information coming out of those reports would have very limited value at this point. Obviously, I would want us to do some kind of checks to ensure that there wasn't any blatant fraud or any kind of blatant theft or misappropriation of assets. But I think that we could, in my opinion, it would be valuable to just go ahead and disclaim a number of years and get us caught up with those ministries, because otherwise we're just currently continuing this cycle where we just continue to be backlogged in these 2 specific entities, which are really holding up the entire government in the EPS accounts. So I'm happy to have a discussion with the Auditor General offline and see the best approach, but I am strongly of the view that we should just disclaim the accounts of these entities for the previous years and try to focus on the current year to try to get caught up, as that would obviously add, the current accounts are much more valuable than 5-year-old accounts at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the Accountant General. I have a lot of sympathy for the position just put by the Accountant General. Obviously, issuing disclaimed audit opinions is a very significant thing to do, and that will be very impactful on those two entities. So the decision to continue is of course one I can take, but one where I need to be mindful of other stakeholders. It's good that the Accountant General is supportive, and I'd be genuinely interested in the position of this committee, because there are pros and cons, and as the Accountant General has quite rightly said, it means that when you pick up again you'll have problems with opening balances, and we would obviously need to do a certain amount of work to make sure there's no fraud, mispractice. So absolutely agree everything the Accountant General has said. It's not an easy one. We put a backlog audit team in place after we were requested to do so, because we knew when we got into busy season we had to park the backlogged ones and focus on the current ones. But we've had a team in place for about 18 months now, and yet still we're in a position where we've now agreed and signed off on 2018. Ministry of Health, we're nearly there with 2019 on the Airport Authority, but nothing is moving quickly. So it's a temptation, but I do believe they've just recruited additional staff in the Ministry of Health, so perhaps it's not quite the right time, but I'd be genuinely interested in what the committee think as well.
I can tell you my view personally, and I've had that discussions with them in the past, that, you know, the utility of a set of financial statements at that old is virtually nothing. And I do see and understand, you know, what issues would be if you do that and you go forward, because, you know, issues with the on the opening balances and stuff, you'd have, if you're going to get an unqualified opinion, you'd have to do work on those opening balances in order to ensure that that the full financial statements that you're auditing are you know, that they're good numbers that you're working with. But so I'm keen to hear I'm keen to see this advance personally. What I would ask you is, who would make that decision?
Me. And I appreciate, and that's why I genuinely welcome. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy. I completely agree. The value of old statements is minimal. As I say, there are other stakeholders than just those of us that are in the room now. But I appreciate also getting the view of the committee through you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I agree with the Accountant General. I mean, the amount of resources and money put into trying to catch up on these reports, where basically what you're getting at this point is an autopsy, and versus, you know, where if we put our time and effort into the current reports, we have a diagnosis and something we can work with. So I fully support it, because as the Auditor General just said, it's been 18 months of full effort, and we're at 2000 and wherever we are, 20.
Other members have a view?
We're still 5 years behind.
You do see some shakings of the head from members of the committee, so I think fair to say that this will be a recommendation from this coming forward from this committee in our report. Ms. Heather, you have other questions to ask?
I just wanted to confirm with the Financial Secretary that the Ministry of Finance role is in supporting these backlogged audits.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, if I could ask the member to perhaps elaborate on what she means. So certainly if the question is being asked of, is the Ministry of Finance willing to support, then that is the case. The Ministry of Finance is absolutely willing to do whatever assistance it can offer to get the backlog cleared away. I was hesitant a bit there because I couldn't quite determine whether the question was, do we support a disclaimer that we just spoke about of these earlier years. I think we would, of the two, we'd probably go for a disclaimer of those years and just move forward for, with as clean a sheet as possible, a clean a start as possible, bearing in mind about the issue that will give, which is opening balances. How do you know in 2024 that the balance for a particular item on the balance sheet is accurate or not? That exists, but we're certainly, of the two, I would say that we would go for disclaimer. If that's not the answer, then certainly yes, whatever we can do to assist with the cleanup, we're more than willing to do.
Thank you very much, Financial Secretary. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Any other questions? We're now going to turn our attention to non-compliance with the Procurement Act and procurement regulations. And for that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Hugh to lead the questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, just some background. The Public Management Finance Act and the financial regulations require that all public bodies comply with all applicable acts and regulations. And so as such, public bodies must comply with the Procurement Act provisions in all procurement transactions. Now, I know earlier the DG gave some explanations, but it still was disappointing to note that in many instances of non-compliance with the Procurement Act and regulations by public bodies, examples varied from some undertook procurement without obtaining approval from the Public Procurement Committee, while others awarded contracts directly without business cases to justify this. What I would do is perhaps ask this question first, so to give the panel, the witnesses, an opportunity to provide some background in asking what is the role of the Central Procurement Office and the guidance and support issued to public bodies in procurement matters.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll ask Mr. Tatum, who is the Deputy Director of the Central Procurement Office, to answer Member Hughes' question.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Tatum, Deputy Director of the Central Procurement Office in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the member, thank you very much for the question. The role of the Central Procurement Office is actually laid out in the Procurement Act. We have 14 specific things that we're supposed to be doing. The main ones, the ones that I would say we spend the majority of our time undertaking, are the development and implementation of things like templates to allow for people to carry out the process without having to be a procurement professional themselves. So the template, builds in a lot of the things that a professional would know, and you just have to fill them out as the technical individual. We also do a lot of training within the organization. Those trainings are actually publicly available and done. The dates and times are issued on our website. We do a lot of them via Zoom, some in person. So if members of the public, for instance, want to join a training to see what we're doing or saying, that is perfectly fine. We're also responsible for providing an electronic platform for procurement, which we've done for the last few years through our system known as Bonfire. That's the system through which we are able to conduct a lot of compliance checks, pull statistics to see how things are going. We also advise chief officers, as well as the entity procurement committees and the public procurement committees, should they have any questions about what is or is not allowed. The public procurement committee is probably our main source of advice, or the main area where we give advice on a regular basis, as they meet once a month to review the larger value projects, so any projects with a value of over $250,000 or more. If there's any other questions you have in terms of our role, I'd be happy to provide that.
No, I think it was useful to get that comprehensive overview on the role as we move forward. Can you also provide what you would consider the root cause for public bodies not complying with the Procurement Act?
Through you, Mr. Chair. There's a few different things that we have identified. If we speak to the items, particularly in this report, if you look at a lot of the services, they are what you would call maybe continuing services, things like janitorial, security, maintenance. The procurement process itself takes a certain amount of time in order to complete. So you may be in an existing contract, which is fully compliant, but if you do not start the procurement process in time for that contract itself to expire, you are going to be in a non-compliant state until such time comes that you've undertaken all of the steps required, such as a business case, such as the public tendering process, the evaluation, the committee reviews and approvals, things like that. Speaking in relation to the root cause of non-compliance, that would definitely be one of them, is simply the procurement's not starting soon enough in order to complete the process prior to the end of an existing contract.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. So, and I can appreciate that, and earlier we had some explanations from the Deputy Governor as well. And understanding that you have instances of continuation of services or transfer of services, etc., what actions or recommendations has the Central Procurement Office done to address these instances?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've done quite a bit of training, as well as trying to provide some specialized templates, particularly for those services. So one of those that we're trialing is actually with janitorial services. So instead of providing just a blank template that doesn't speak to any particular subject matter, we have provided templates that speak to that subject matter, which should allow them to be filled out and completed a bit quicker. We've always, of course, given advice that you should start as soon as possible. Each requirement of the Procurement Act typically is a gateway to moving toward a further step. So if you have a procurement that needs, or a contract or that's going to expire, you can write a business case for that as soon as you have an approved budget or approved funding source. You don't necessarily have to then undertake the procurement immediately thereafter. So if you have a contract, for instance, ending in June of this year, you can have an approved business case now. That will allow you to then undertake the procurement when you need to become compliant. What ends up happening is once it's identified or once someone picks it up, they may start the business case process at that point, and that process can take anywhere from a week to a month, depending on who's writing it, if you have the required information to write it, or if you need to go seek that from stakeholders in order to get just that first step completed. So we've taken a couple different steps. Like I said, the training's probably the single biggest one. We try to break our trainings down into each individual step, because we know procurement in itself, outside of to our office, is not the most exciting task in the world. So we try to keep our training short and concise and on a specific topic, such as either business case development or tender document development or these sort of things.
Can you provide some insight to the committee on single sourcing? And I take it from a perspective where there are times where there may be an emergency piece of equipment and it's available, and the equipment is needed now. It's not needed 2, 3, 6 months down the road. And then there's other circumstances where perhaps it is a software or services that fall in line with the objectives or the requirements of the ministry or the agency. How are those managed, and how is that determined?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the sole sourcing, or as it's known in the procurement regulations, a direct award, is covered under Regulation 5. So what Regulation 5 does is it lays out the conditions under which a direct award is allowed, and then that, once it's identified, needs to be supported with the additional information to show that it is actually a legitimate direct award. A direct award is a viable procurement route. There is no issue necessarily with a valid direct award, but it still needs to go through the appropriate committees. So a direct award still requires a business case if it's at the appropriate thresholds. The threshold in this case is $100,000 or greater, where a business case would be required to accompany a direct award. If it's $250,000 or greater, then that needs to go to the Public Procurement Committee. The direct award request for review prior to recommendation to a chief officer, and the chief officer would then have the ability to sign that off as a direct award. If it's an emergency, there's a difference between the emergency procurements and your kind of standard procurement process. The Procurement Act, Section 3, covers all of the exemptions to the Procurement Act. So for instance, the purchase of land is one of those. Those don't come to the Public Procurement Committee, even though it's a purchase. Another one of those is the use of the emergency provisions of the Act. So emergency is defined in the Act, and if it's a genuine emergency, there's, I think, 3 definitions at the moment, one of those being that a state of emergency is actually declared, one that there's a threat to life, and another is a threat to, I believe, property, something along those lines. That decision to treat a procurement as a emergency would also have to be taken by the chief officer. If a procurement is deemed to be an emergency procurement, so it meets that definition, then the requirements of the Procurement Act and regulations fall away, besides the requirement to show value for money. When I say fall away, it means you can kind of pick and choose which parts of the process you are going to do to identify value for money. So you may skip the business case stage if you elect to. You may skip the public tendering stage if you elect to. Once at the end of the day, you can show whatever you have done is value for money. So if it is a genuine emergency, there isn't a hold up, if you want to call it that, in terms of walking through every single step. That would also eliminate the mandatory requirement for the various committee reviews. So if you couldn't make it to a PPC meeting in time to make a purchase, these sort of things, that would not be deemed as a non-compliance. Those would be things, for instance, if it was picked up that a purchase was made without going through the process, and the Auditor General's office went back to a ministry and said, why was this purchase made without these approvals? I would expect that ministry to be able to say it was made under this emergency provision. So I wouldn't expect those to be items covered in this report, though it's entirely possible that maybe it was made and, maybe lack of documentation or change of staff has, caused that to be lost as to why it wouldn't be known.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank Mr. Tatum for that detailed response. Speaking of value for money, Mr. Tatum, on bonfire, there is a point system. You get certain points for price, et cetera, et cetera. Is that a standard point system, or who sets the point system for the bid?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the point system for each procurement is going to be set on a per procurement basis. So there is not a standard. We will give advice if people ask us in terms of how should things be structured, but that will vary significantly on what it is you are purchasing. For instance, services tend to be a much lower focus on price because there needs to be a much higher focus on the quality of the delivery of those services. And the delivery of those services depend on experience and things that you need to be able to rate on a scale. It's not just like you have it or you don't in many cases. Goods, for instance, tend to be a bit more of the opposite. So you can control the quality of goods by setting your specification, and that specification is typically a you have it or you don't, which means that anyone that makes it past that first stage of complying with the specification, you know that you've already controlled the quality of those goods, so now you can focus on price to make sure the government is getting the best value possible. When it comes to services, the adjustment of those ratios, price to quality, for instance, again, will be made at the ministry or the department level, but it tends to be kind of spread that way, that in services you tend to see a lower threshold, somewhere between maybe 35 and 50% seems to be around the average that we'll see for services, sometimes even as low as 25, depending on how specialized those services are.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add just a few more onto what Mr. Tatum just said, and to say thanks to Member Hugh for asking that very important question, because it just brought home to me what we recently experienced in finance, which is in Ministry Portfolio and Office, you have to take care in specifying the award of points and what areas it covers. Because when we went out to tender for the procurement of services relating to outcome budgeting, for example, it ended up that, without giving away the game, it ended up that the bidder with the least cost was actually, in our view, probably unable to do the job as well as we wanted. Their cost was lower because they had set aside a lower number of hours to do the task, and we felt that was inappropriate for the task at hand. But yet the score, the points that they got as a result of having submitted a low cost, those number of points were quite high. So I think the general message I would like to get across the ministers and portfolios is be careful what you specify in terms of how you want to go about awarding services, how you want to go about rewarding or picking your particular procurement, because least cost is not always the best outcome.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, thank you for those responses, and I agree, because in many instances, providers will go to great efforts to make an orange look like an apple, until you bite into it and you find out it's an orange. Maybe even a bitter orange too. Just out of curiosity, if I could ask the Deputy Director, are we still doing reverse auctions? And if we are you finding those beneficial?
Reverse auctions are still a part of the procurement regulations, so they are allowed. As far as I'm aware, one has not been done in quite some time. However, there is another system we call the best and final offer, which accomplishes a similar outcome of allowing the top vendors from a process to then compete on typically pricing alone in a secondary stage. So once you have an outcome, that tends to be much more suitable for things like services, because you do want them to consider where they are cutting those costs, so that we aren't just going back to them saying, please lower this, and we don't have an understanding of where those savings are coming from. That could be fairly detrimental. The reverse auctions tend to be best placed for goods, again, because of you being able to set your specification and control the quality. If I purchase an iPhone for $1 or $1,000, it's the same iPhone. However, if I purchase services at $1 or $1,000, you don't know necessarily. There's normally a significant disparity in quality there. So the reverse auctions are still allowed. We do still have a system that allows us to run those. We have had some discussions with the director, who sends his apologies for not being able to be here, around trying to get the goods back into play. The decision on whether or not that is done is up to the procuring entity as well, and it does add a time aspect to that. So the reverse auction is a system where you've got to get to the end of your initial evaluation. You've got to have a top 3 or a top 4, or at least a few bidders to participate, because it's a live system. So if you don't have enough, for instance, if you only get one bid, you can't do reverse auction. But then you've also got to set aside time to do a bit of training with the vendors so that they understand how to use the system when the time comes. So just the use of the reverse auction may produce savings, but it will definitely increase the amount of time it takes to run that procurement. So because it's an optional requirement at the moment. It tends to get skipped, if you want to call it that, or decided not to be done on, just because of the time component and being able to get the approval done and receive those goods. But just one thing I wanted to add as well from on the previous question, the evaluation process is cumulative, if you want to call it that. So a vendor that has not met a pass or fail requirement will not move on to the next stages, which would include pricing. So for entities that have set those pass or fail requirements fairly stringently and have thought through things that they absolutely need to have, it's not a matter of if they're willing to provide it. If they're not providing it as a part of their submission, it doesn't matter what their price is or how low it is, they would not advance to that stage. So that's just something to take into account, that if someone has made it all the way to the last stage, which is the consideration of pricing, that is typically an indication that, you know, their submission was strong enough to get to that stage. Though obviously sometimes the pricing itself will reveal things that we were not aware of, because the way that our system works is the pricing for vendors is protected until the rest of the evaluation is done. No one within the system, not even the Central Procurement Office, can access that pricing until action is taken to release that. It's time stamped who released it, when it was released, and if the other evaluation was completed prior to that. So sometimes we aren't aware, or in the majority of cases we aren't aware of pricing before making all the other bits of the assessment. Sometimes pricing will reveal that some things may have been missed, that may have not been caught in the proposal. But I would say the majority of the time, the vendors that make it to the pricing stage are at least a suitable proposal for what we're asking for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, no further questions. I just actually want to thank Mr. Tatum for the very competent way in which he answered the questions, and for the information provided. I could sit down and chat to him all day, but we would be at risk of boring even the accountants and the auditors in the room. So thank you for the responses.
Thank you, Mr. Hugh, and I do reflect and support your comments with regard to your participation or your first time here, and I do appreciate the forthright way in which you have responded to us today. I'm going to move on to and talk about changes in, or question members FS on changes in reporting standards. And for that, I'm going to turn to Ms. Barbara Connolly to lead that questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Financial Secretary. During the 2022 financial year, several financial reporting standards were published, and others were amended, which had various implications for many public bodies. Several changes to accounting standards are planned and coming into effect in the coming few years, which will significantly impact the various public bodies. For example, 2 new international public sector standards, the EPSAS, and 1 international financial reporting standard, EFRS, amendment came into force on the 1st of January 2023. Public bodies must consider and account for these in the years ahead. I know you mentioned earlier that with the EPSAS, you all are providing training through CIFA, I believe. Can you also indicate what your plans and actions are what the ministry is taking to prepare public bodies to implement the new reporting standards? And I guess you can speak to the second standard, which is the International Financial Reporting Standard, in your response.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank Member Borden for her questions. Yes, we are, the Auditor General report mentions 3 particular standards. IPSAS 41, which is dealing with financial instruments. I think 42 is IPSAS 42 is another one. I think that deals with social benefits from memory. And then IFRS 17 deals with insurance matters. I'm going to ask the Accountant General to elaborate on these aspects, but just to say that I can tell the Audit Office that one of the reasons why some of the accounts might have been a bit later than planned for in terms of submission to her office was particularly to do with training and considerations of IPSAS 41 financial instruments, and I think it may have also delayed on her end. It might have caused more consideration to be given, particularly on 41 financial instruments, before reaching conclusions on the audits that she and her office were doing. So I'm going to ask the Accountant General to elaborate further, but I do know that in particular for IPSAS 41, we've engaged the services of a Big Four accounting firm to help with the training and the technical aspects of that particular standard.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned earlier, the Ministry of Finance and Treasury work together to provide annual training to the CFOs across government and the SAGCs as well. They're all invited to the training. And this is an update on the IPSAS standards as well as the IFRS. And so we provide that training annually. Specifically in this report, we see IPSAS 41, IPSAS 42, and IFRS 17. So I'll speak to each of those individually. So IPSAS 41, we had specific training. We worked with one of the Big Four companies and provided a workshop for all CFOs as well as their finance team. So if any other members of their finance team wanted to join the Zoom call, they could do so. So we had that training. We had a workshop one day, and it ended up that we had subsequent meetings as well to ensure we clarified fully everyone's questions. And then we also provided contact information for any CFOs that wanted to liaise directly with the firm then to get answers to any specific questions they had. We additionally provided templates for the CFOs to use in recognizing the financial instruments. So IPSAS 41 is related to financial instruments. So that one was done with a workshop with the Big Four, with a Big Four company. IPSAS 42 is related to social benefits, and that was only related to 2 entities in government. And so we communicated directly with those 2 entities and ensured that we gave advice to them and ensured that they implemented it for the 2023 financial year. Lastly, IFRS 17 is related to insurance contracts, and that only really related to Cynical. We liaised with them and ensured that they had implemented the standard, and they confirmed that they have implemented that standard. But as stated, every year we provide training to all finance teams across government, as well as in Treasury. We have a team of 2 or 3 of our members who are constantly looking at the standards to ensure that we're up to date with all new standards coming online. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the Accountant General. Thank you very much for that very detailed response and update on the training for these 2 reporting standards. Thank you.
Turning now to status of the EPS audit. I know we explored that this morning with the DG, but I do have a few questions really for you as well from the ministry. The Auditor General, in her report, acknowledged the progress that is being made by that has been made by the Ministry of Finance to rectify the fact that the government EPS audits have all received adverse audit opinions for several years, and recommended that the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development continue to implement the action plan to improve the quality of the EPS consolidated financial statements. And she opined that the action plan will move the EPS towards a desired unqualified audit opinion in the longer term. Can you tell the committee or give us a status update of the progress by the Ministry of Finance in implementing the action plan to address the qualification points.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask again the Accountant General to elaborate on the action plan, because it's primarily been led by the, not primarily, it's been led by the Treasury Department in addressing the various qualification points which the Auditor General has raised in her report. And as you know, and as Mr. Chairman and the committee knows, there are quite a number of points listed as to reasons why the entire public sector has received an adverse opinion for quite some time. And you know, as we go through the report, I actually numbered them, and there was something like 11 captioned areas as to reasons why an adverse opinion was issued. One of them we spoke about quite extensively before, which was the post-retirement healthcare liability, for example, but there are many others. So the action plan for the benefit of the listening public was looking at these areas that led to the qualifications, and to outline and to state what was going to be done in respect of each of these areas, with the intention of getting an improvement to the entire public sector opinion. And Mr. Chairman, if I could just spend 1 minute just for the benefit of the public to say that we've said, the Auditor General has said earlier, and she's evidenced it in her report, that all of the individual ministries, portfolios, and offices are getting clean opinions, clean audit opinions from the audit office. So the public could very well be confused and puzzled as to why, when you put all of those individual parts together, which are getting clean opinions, why is it that then the whole of government, the entire public sector, ends up with an adverse opinion? That can be very puzzling as to why you got 46 or so separate entities, all clean, but when you put them all together, you get an adverse opinion. The reason for that, very quickly, Mr. Chairman and members, and you've heard it before, is that there are certain special considerations that do not sit within any of those individual 46 or so entities. Special considerations such as the post-retirement healthcare liability, that sits and belongs with the government as a whole, the entire public sector as a whole, and it's not the responsibility of any of those individual entities. So they're all clean. They escape the scrutiny of particular items. So they're coming back clean from the audit office with clean opinions. There are other aspects such as the valuation of roads that don't sit in any of those individual 40+ entities. There is, you know, the consideration about the expenses of the public service pension board as distinct from the three underlying pension funds, which are, you know, $1 billion organization. There's consideration about bringing the expenses of the pension board administration of those funds into government. So there are some really special considerations which do not belong in the individual entities' financial statements, and therefore they get clean opinions. But there are some national, if you can call them that, there are some national issues which then belong in the entire public sector financial statements, and those are the root causes of why we're getting adverse opinions on the EPS, the whole of government. And the action plan is meant to address those particular problematic and national issues.
Mr. Chairman, thank you to the Financial Secretary for that good lead into the update on the entire public sector accounts. And just to extend on what the Finance Secretary has said, we're getting clean accounts on all the ministries, but the ministries have two sets of accounts, which are basically the entity, which is what they're getting the clean accounts clean opinions on from the Auditor General. And they also have an executive set of accounts, which is where all their revenue and everything else is recognized. And that's not actually being audited, except for when those numbers are consolidated into the entire public sector accounts. Because the entire public sector accounts is nothing more than a consolidation of all of the different ministries of government. It's a consolidation unit, and that's all they really do. They have no ability to affect change for any of these entities' executive accounts. So we're really just a consolidation entity at this point. One thing we're looking at doing to enforce that and to ensure that the responsibility rests where the authority to make change is we're trying to merge the executive and entity orgs so that the audits will take place then at the executive level, which means each ministry will merge their accounts into one set of accounts, and an audit will take place then on the entire set of books for each ministry. And then the entire public sector unit in the Treasury Department will have a much easier job of ensuring that those numbers are just consolidated into one set of accounts. Mr. Chairman, if we are to go through the action plan, I don't want to bore the committee completely. I'm happy to provide a copy of the action plan, but I do want to go through some of the major issues that we're aware of in the action plan that have been aired numerous times before, and I would like to give an update on what we've done to try to improve things as from our last meeting, basically. As the Financial Secretary said, the Public Service Pensions Board, their accounts were not included previously in the EPS accounts. And the Auditor General rightly brought this up. And so what we've done is in 2020, we consolidated the balances into the EPS accounts. However, the Audit Office was still concerned because we didn't do a good job of breaking out those expenses into the relevant categories. We tended to just place the expenses into the EPS, but not giving the full details of the breakdown of those costs. And so for 2021, we will be providing that breakdown in the EPS accounts. So we expect that to be cleared up with the 2021 EPS accounts. Mr. Chairman, another issue is the real property. We have had valuations redone in 2021, and that was related to all real property for government, including the whole roads network and everything. And the Auditor General's office is still in discussions with us and the National Roads Authority to ensure that all assets are included in that report. So we'll be working with them to go through that. And just as an update of where we are currently, we are looking to do another valuation this year ahead of next year's election, because we don't want to get the evaluation caught up in the middle of an election. We'd like to go ahead and get the evaluation done now so that when the election comes around next year, we'll already have all the balances, and it'll be a bit easier process rather than having kind of a perfect storm where all of the valuations are being done at the same time. We're reshuffling all the entities and so on. So we'll try to get those valuations conducted this year. Mr. Chairman, as we've discussed at length earlier, the post-retirement healthcare liability, which is a $2.2 billion liability, and just to note, it actually was $2.6 billion in previous years. It's actually come down, and that's more related to the interest rates going up and the calculations related to the liability. No decision has been taken at this time. We're currently under the same practice that's been in place for a number of years of including it in the financial statement notes, not on the face of the financial statements. As the Finance Secretary said, we would expect a change like this to happen at the beginning of a government's term rather than at the end. It really wouldn't be fair at this point to ask the Minister for Finance to add this to their accounts at this stage. However, we will obviously be doing that, but realistically it's not, it wouldn't be fair, and it wouldn't be comparable then to the previous 4 years of accounts, previous 3 years of accounts in her term, to include that at this stage. However, because the 2023 accounts are to be finalized in May, we will be having that discussion. But realistically, this would best be placed to happen at the beginning of a 4-year election term. Mr. Chairman, the next area is in regards to the incompleteness of revenue, and I'm quite happy with our progress on this item. As I mentioned previously, at our last meeting here at Public Accounts Committee, we were working on recruiting a deputy director for the revenue unit and expanding the revenue unit. I'm pleased to announce this individual has come on board, and they came on board, I believe, it was the beginning of November 2023. So during that time, they were getting caught up to speed, understanding the process, the gaps, what's the best plan, formulating a plan of attack on how to best address the revenue completeness matters. On January 15th, this individual, our deputy director, sent out emails to all the major revenue earning entities across government. And I'll just go quickly through some of the documents that were requested in this email. They requested the budget and actual amounts collected for the last 3 to 5 year period, the financial statements for the last financial year, the org chart for the entity, the revenue billing and collection procedures manual, job descriptions for those responsible for revenue billing and collection process, recent internal audit reports and reviews, recent statistics reports, the aged receivables as at 2 different dates, October 2023 and December 2023. Mr. Chairman, this request was sent out on January 15th, and this is again gathering information to ensure that we put together a proper plan of how to attack the real issues. I was given an update yesterday, and so far we have 2 ministries who've provided the information requested, and obviously that's not the best result we want, but we have to consider the fact that we're in the middle of financial statement reporting and audits at this time. So financial statement reporting, CFOs are required to report by February, this year would be February 29th, to the Auditor General's office, and then an audit would be conducted between March 1st and the 31st of April. And so we appreciate that they're quite busy at this time, so we are being a bit more patient than we normally would with this, but we do expect to have this under control going forward, and we will be formulating a plan which we're happy to share with this committee and the Auditor General's office of how we can best attack the revenue completeness issue. So that's something that we're quite proud of, our accomplishments so far, and we expect to have better results going forward on that. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to advise the committee that for the 2020 accounts that were signed off in December, the EPS accounts, we were able to remove the contingency provisions and contingencies for environmental liabilities. And so that's a small step forward for the EPS accounts as well. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the main categories of the action plan. We feel that we have this plan and we're working towards achieving the various steps laid out in it to achieve eventually an unqualified opinion. But realistically, the main issue still remains the post-retirement healthcare liability, and of course the revenue completeness. But we feel we have a plan for the revenue completeness. The post-retirement healthcare liability is not as clear as a specific plan that we're working on for the revenue completeness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that detailed explanation and update with regard to the plan. Just curious, I mean, do you have any date in mind as to when you would plan to achieve a qualified opinion? I know that's just taking it one step at a time.
Mr. Chairman, I would expect that to be shortly after the decision to include the post-retirement healthcare liability is made to include that on our books. I can't confirm at this stage when that will be, unfortunately, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so effectively what you're saying is that the needle won't move until you deal with that one issue.
Mr. Chairman, I feel I can't speak for the Auditor General's office, but in discussions with them, it's quite clear that that's so pervasive that the liability being $2.2 billion and or $2.1 billion and our net worth being $2.2 billion it would be hard to see how we could ever get clean accounts without having that matter on the face of the financials.
Okay. Members have any other questions? Well, that concludes our questioning of you and the ministry and your staff, FS, and that brings us to the end of this hearing today. And so I want to thank you for the responses and your response to the questions given by the committee today, and thank you for the frankness in which way you have shared that information with us. When I was welcoming everyone this morning, I failed to recognize Hewitt, Griffith's doctor. Hewitt, you were sitting right behind that chair, and I did not see you. So I do apologize, but I did want to recognize you as from the Ministry's office, from the Office of the Ministry of Finance, and say welcome to the committee here today as well. Thank you to Auditor General and members for your participation. This concludes this hearing of the Public Accounts Committee. So we'll consider the meeting closed at this time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Everyone, I would just say, I think I'd like to invite you all to have lunch with us in the lunch